For a day and a night, Jon pushed his northern-bred steed to its limits. At least a dozen watchmen tried to join Jon on his gallop. One by one they dropped out, and Jon finished the final leg of the journey alone, minus his direwolf. The last hearth broke the horizon as the sun had nearly set. Jon thought it was odd he was not confronted by a sentry. He had half a mind to push his horse through the walls of the last hearth to get to his wife. GoT whined incessantly and alerted on every gust of wind or distant snapped twig. Jon kept himself at a distance and lapped the castle as darkness had enveloped them. Jon then dismounted his steed and tied him off at a distance from the castle, just inside the tree line. He approached on foot, still lacking any observation of security or life in general. Jon crept up the steps, sidestepping small fires and slipping inside the unguarded portcullis. The courtyard was vacant and dark. The castle seemed deserted until the slender man's savagery revealed itself to Jon. Once deep inside the courtyard, the sparse fires made Jon's sight possible. Bodies were piled nearly 3 deep, soldiers, stewards, and stable hands. Jon was not shocked at the piles of bodies, or the careless way they were strewn about the courtyard. The sight that made Jon uneasy was every sword in the courtyard remained sheathed. Jon was surrounded by what remained of the free folk, Lady Munda's court, the remnants of Mance Rayder's kingdoms, and not a single warrior died with steel in hand. This mortified Jon as the slender man's tactics had seemed unusual, even impossible. Jon continued through the courtyard, assuming he would make it all the way to Munda's bedchamber without meeting another soul. GoT whipped about the courtyard, sniffing nearly every pile of bodies in hopes of finding someone alive. Jon raised his eyes to the covered apartments on the opposite side of the last hearth's main hall. The sparse flames flickered, but Jon's eyesight was clear. The mason stones of the support wall for the watchtower were blasted inward. The large hole in the wall had edges that still glowed and smoked. Someone wanted access to the apartments badly. Jon's mind raced as he inspected the red-hot, glowing mason stones. This was magic beyond witnessing, beyond testimony. Jon was perhaps the only remaining dragon rider in the kingdoms, yet he was positive no dragon would or could make a passage this clean, this precise. Jon passed through the makeshift access, yet GoT refused to follow. Jon called and whistled to him, still GoT refused to follow, his red eyes seemingly pleading with Jon not to continue. Jon had little time to spare. It was obvious the warlock had visited. The question was whether he was still present. If one person was left alive, it would be Munda. She alone knew of the satchel's location, probably carelessly thrown about in some insignificant cupboard. Once inside the base of the watchtower, Jon spun around, taking in the room, and opposite hole in the exterior tower wall. This was the warlock's entry point. The warlock refused to use stealth. He slaughtered these people, each and every one dying without even an attempt to defend themselves. Jon was furious as he sprinted down the hallway, no longer giving concern for stealth. The bastard sword of his ancestors' ice was gripped tightly in his right hand. Jon now prayed the warlocks would cross his path. He assumed the slender man decided to leave one man alive, like his rangers sent north, like Samwell's expedition. The warlock always seemed to leave one man alive to tell the tale. Perhaps he would spare his wife. She would likely be the last to die, considering she was the only one aware of the horn's location. The passageway was still void of any life. Jon finally reached the door leading to his lady's bedchamber. GoT had taken the long way around and was waiting for Jon at the bedchamber door. He sniffed incessantly at the entrance. Jon placed his left palm flat on the half-opened door and gently forced it open. He had hoped to silently enter, but the door creaked as Jon forced his entry. The hearth burned low, but still emitted just enough light for Jon to clear the room with his newly adjusted eyes. On his second scan, he saw her. She was huddled on the ground in the far corner, naked, shivering and weeping silently, or nearly silently. Jon slowly approached her, his sword grip now slightly loosened.
"Milady, Lady Munda, my wife, tell me you're all right."
Jon whispered softly as the huddled mass of flesh and bright red hair breathed deeply and slowly raised her head. Her eyes were glossy and bloodshot, with vomit streaking down her front. Jon felt his face twist when he finally registered. She was alive. Jon was now concerned at what was done to her. Jon slowly approached her and she scurried away from him and cowered in the corner, still weeping and terrified. Jon still slowly approached her. His eyes scanned her immediate surroundings. He wanted to be sure she was without access to any weapon. Jon knew she was not in her right mind. The closer he approached, the more she wept. Jon knew she was terrified, not of him, but of anyone. Jon smiled widely and spoke softly to her.
Munda, it's me. You're safe, I promise.
Jon attempted to convince her.
Safe, safe. What is safe?
Munda repeated continuously. She seemed to be questioning the meaning of the word. She seemed legitimately confused.
Why worry about safe? Dead. I died. Again and again I died.
Munda muttered, and Jon's heart broke. It was as broken as his lady wife. Jon ripped his cloak from his back and attempted to cover her shivering. Her eyes quickly shifted from Jon to his cloak and then back again. She was terrified but was trying to trust. Still, her terror could not be suppressed. She shivered even more violently once Jon had covered her. Jon was able to place his non-sword hand on her back and she seemed to not pull away. Jon kept his hand there as an attempt to prove he was not a threat. Her shaking seemed to lessen, and over time the color seemed to return to her lips.
Stones. The small stones. Death. So much death.
Munda repeated to herself, and Jon strained to make out her incoherent ramblings. Jon's attention was broken as a shadow flashed across the wall opposite the hearth. Jon turned in a rage as his grip on ice tightened and he swung violently at the intruder. Ice struck forged steel as the intruder pleaded.
Please, Lord Commander, we mean no harm.
Jon refused to lower his blade and stayed on the offensive, constantly striking in a blind rage. Their swords locked as Munda screamed hysterically.
Jon, come back to us.
Sir Hunts pleaded as Jon's rage subsided, and Jon dropped ice to the floor in either embarrassment or despair. Once Jon collected himself, he returned to Munda's side. After a few silent moments, Sir Hunts spoke to his Lord Commander.
The perimeter has been secured. There are no threats inside the castle. We shall wait for you in the courtyard.
He finished. Jon could barely muster a slight head nod, and Sir Hunts took this as appreciation and a dismissal.
Munda, you're safe. We control the castle. You're safe.
Jon pleaded with her as she shook her head in refusal.
Not safe. Never safe. Stones. Death. I died. You believe me, don't you? I died. I must be dead.
Munda exclaimed to Jon's confusion. Jon could finally hold her close, his attention less on the mission and more for her well-being. It was then that Jon thought he should ask.
Munda, did he find it? Did he find what he wanted?
Munda silently shook her head. She seemed like a guilty child caught in wrongdoing, ashamed of her own actions.
I told him. He had to kill me. Again and again he killed me. If I told him, he would stop, and I could stay dead. I wished to die. But he left me here, alive. Still alive.
Munda finished in disappointment. Jon was shook by this realization. The slender man made Munda wish for death, so much so she was disappointed to still be alive.
Can you walk? We need to move.
Jon asked, and Munda agreed to try. She shuffled her feet and collapsed to the ground upon nearly every attempt.
He has it. He has what he wanted.
Munda chanted, and Jon felt his heart beat out of his chest. Jon bent at the waist and lifted her from the ground as she wrapped her arms around him. Jon felt as she had learned to trust him, finally. She shut her eyes tightly, refusing to take in any of her surroundings. Jon carried her into the courtyard, where he met eyes with Sir Hunts.
Are there any survivors?
Jon whispered as to not disturb his wife. Sir Hunts reluctantly shook his bowed head, indicating that the castle was indeed dead.
No. I'm sorry to say, Lord Commander.
He replied as Jon's eyes shifted to the pyres that taken to flame. The Night's Watch had started burial rites for the fallen freefolk. Munda had finally begun to trust Jon, though her whimpers fell silent. Jon placed her on her side at the entrance to the stables. Jon saw her panic return once he had broken physical contact. Jon returned to her quickly once her panic returned. Jon helped her onto his horse and quickly mounted his steed directly behind her.
Stones. Stones kill.
Munda cried and panicked as she fixated on the gravel floor of the courtyard. Jon continued to soothe her as he pulled the hood over her head. Once her vision was obscured, she had seemed to calm slightly.
Orders, Lord Commander.
Sir Hunt's asked directly and commandeered Sir Jon's attention.
Raise the alarm.
Jon directed, and Sir Hunt's eyes seemed to widen at this order.
Recall the long-range rangers. Set out short-range sentries both north and south of the wall. The Watch is now officially under threat. Cancel all leave passes and evacuate all of Molestown here to the last hearth. We will need a stronghold south of the wall.
Jon ordered directly, and Sir Hunt seemed to have dozens of questions, of which Jon attempted to answer without being asked.
We don't know who or why. We will prepare nonetheless.
Jon advised to Sir Hunt's agreement.
Molestown will be emptied before dusk.
Ensure all watchmen on duty at Molestown are rotated back to their primary watch castle. Dispatch the builders from Castle Black to make repairs, and man the last hearth's defenses.
Jon ordered. Still, Sir Hunt seemed uneasy.
Send word to Qyburn. I'll be needing his expertise on my return to Eastwatch.
Jon finished, and only then did Sir Hunt's reply.
Jon, are we at war?
Sir Hunt's asked honestly, as Jon turned his reins and his horse towards the courtyard entrance.
Yes, we are at war, but we are not yet sure of who the enemy is, or what they want.
Jon finished as his steed then galloped out of the courtyard.